These days, if you open controller or trade a plane, the numbers don't match anything your brain believes an airplane should cost. Half of it looks like someone typed random digits until it felt expensive enough. You've got little two-seat composite rockets like the VL3 or TL Sparker with a Rotax 915 up front showing up at $380,000 to $420,000 once you add the options any real owner would pick. A brand new 172, which is basically a 1950s metal tube with glass slapped in, is strolling past the $500,000 mark like that's normal. Take a Turbo 182 and load it up. Add the dealer fluff, insurance, tax, everything they pile on before they hand you the keys, and suddenly it's flirting with $1 million like it's trying to sneak into turboprop territory. On paper, it makes no sense. Price for a two-seats VL3 or TL Sparker should not in any world stand in the same circle with the price for a used Cirrus SR22. And in my opinion, a 172 have no business sitting next to a Diamond DA40 on price points. It almost looks like they are making it up. Even the 182 has no business hovering around $1 million. We are in a self-feeding loop where everyone blames everyone else for everything. Because when you look at the pricing paradox, manufacturers say they raise prices because demand is lower, and to be able to afford to keep making planes, they have to charge more for the few they make because of economics of scale. But higher prices thins out the buyer pool, and a smaller buyer pool means manufacturers will raise unit cost again, and that higher prices, again, turns around and thins out the buyer pool even further. And economics of scale, again, will call for another higher prices. We can go on and on. Trust me, this loop never ends. But this is a bit oversimplified because there is more to the costs going up than smaller buyer pool because certification costs ballooned. Liability exposure in the US made every airplane more expensive to build and support. Insurance, testing, compliance, and shrinking pilot populations all pushed the baseline cost higher before profit was even added. But why are more people not going experimental? Because when you line the 182 next to the Sling High Wing, the Sling quietly embarrasses it on payload with full fuel and on fuel efficiency while getting surprisingly close on cruise speed. On paper, the Turbo Skylane claims about 165 knots, max range around 971 nautical miles, a useful load of 998 pounds, and 87 gallons of usable fuel, which is about 522 pounds of fuel. The avionics are the usual G1000 NXI plus some extra toys, then you see the line that would make you pause. Full fuel payload, 476 pounds. That's the number that matters in the real world. 87 gallons usable is 522 pounds of fuel. Take that off the 998-pound useful load, and you're left with roughly 476 pounds for people and bags. Now imagine a simple trip. You want full fuel for range and flexibility, and you toss, say, 50 pounds of luggage in the back. That leaves you with 426 pounds for human beings. That's 2 average adults and maybe a child, not 4 adults with bags. If you want to put 4 normal-sized people and some baggage in the airplane, you are giving up a big chunk of fuel from the start. So the $1 million 4-seater is, in full fuel reality, is often a 2 to 3 people plus bags airplane unless you go into fuel-tetris mode. Now look at the Sling High Wing. Sling's own numbers put the useful load up around 1,065 pounds in the best builds. The main tanks are around 51 to 52 gallons, which is roughly 308 to 312 pounds of fuel at 6 pounds a gallon. There's a baggage limit of 77 pounds. If you do the simple brochure math, you take 1,065 and subtract about 308, and you get roughly 757 pounds left for people and bags at full fuel. Even if you use more conservative, typical useful loads from real-world builds, you still land at a full fuel payload around 735 pounds. So with full fuel on board, the Sling gives you roughly 735 to 757 pounds for people and bags. The Turbo 182 gives you 476. The Sling has an advantage of roughly 260 pounds. That's an extra full-size adult in their luggage, or 2 kids in a realistic pile of stuff. Run a simple thought experiment. 4 170-pound adults are 680 pounds. Add 50 pounds of bags and you're at 730 pounds of payload you'd like to carry. Line them side by side, and we can agree that in the Turbo 182 with full fuel, you hit the wall immediately. You have to start from how much fuel can I afford to leave behind and back into a range number. But in the Sling, with that typical 735-pound full fuel payload, your 730-pound load of 4 adults and 50 pounds of bags basically fits inside the envelope. Now look at cruise and fuel burn. The Turbo 182's POH at around 10,000 feet shows 65% or so power, giving you 135 to 136 knots true on roughly 12 gallons per hour, and 75% power giving you about 145 knots on around 14.5 gallons per hour. That's roughly 11.5 nautical miles per gallon at the lower setting, and about 10 at the higher one. The Sling High Wing with a Rotax 915IS is living in the 135 to 145 knot world as well, depending on altitude and power setting. Economy cruise fuel burn is in the 7-ish gallons per hour ballpark, maybe up around 7.5. Max continuous is just over 10. So if you pick 135 knots on 7.4 gallons, you're getting about 18 miles per gallon. At 145 knots on that same sort of burn, you're closer to 19 or 20 miles per gallon. Put simply, at broadly similar speeds, the Turbo 182 is doing 135 to 145 knots on somewhere between 12 and 15 gallons an hour, and the Sling is doing 135 to 145 knots on about 7 to 8 gallons an hour. You're getting roughly the same cruise speed on about half the fuel. Yes, the Turbo 182 can go faster up high if you lean on it, but it's doing that while pouring fuel overboard compared to the Sling. On paper ranges, the Turbo 182 can show a max range up near 971 nautical miles in best range conditions. The Sling's eco-cruise numbers are more like the 850 to 900 plus nautical mile region. But those paper numbers only matter if you can actually keep both the seats and the tanks full at the same time. In practice, the Turbo 182 hits its payload wall long before it runs out of tank volume. The Sling hits its tankage limit first, so for 4 people plus fuel plus realistic reserves trips, the Sling often ends up the more usable traveling machine, even if the Turbo 182 can point to a slightly longer still airline on the brochure. But when you consider how people actually buy planes in the real world, most people are not paying for the spreadsheet. They're paying for the ecosystem. The 182 is certified. It fits neatly into existing financing and insurance pathways. There's a huge global maintenance support network. The type has a long, boring safety record. It looks like a proper airplane to conservative decision makers, insurers, boards, and spouses. The Sling, as good as it is, lives in the experimental and kit universe. Build quality and paperwork matter a lot. Insurance and training can be more awkward. Support is more about finding the right shop and the right community than just dropping it at any random maintenance outfit on the field. Resale is tied heavily to model reputation and how well the particular airplane was built. If you're a GA nerd, you look at the numbers and you shake your head. Obviously, you say the Sling is the smarter buy. More payload, better efficiency, modern engine, lower initial cost. The Turbo 182 looks like a bad joke. But if you're a time-poor business owner, a flight school, a government agency, or just a conservative owner who doesn't want any surprises in their life, you say, I don't want the experimental world. I want something banks, insurers, and my chief pilot have seen 1,000 times. You knowingly overpay for that comfort. You can finance a Cessna blindfolded. Try doing that with an experimental, and most banks either laugh or hand you loan terms that feel like punishment. Insurance is the same story. Underwriters trust airplanes they've seen for 50 years. Anything experimental raises eyebrows, premiums, or flat out nope. I don't think we're ever really getting out of this loop, because to fix it, you'd have to fix everything upstream. Liability, certification, insurance, financing, the pilot pipeline, all of it. And on top of that, new airplanes' biggest enemy is their own 50-year-old siblings. The old airframes kill the volume for new ones, and once volume dies, price goes vertical. New airplane economics only work when you're building thousands a year, not a few hundred. But when there's a 1970s or 1980s 172 sitting on the next ramp for a fifth of the money, most buyers peel off into the used market long before they ever even think about signing for a new one. This is not all down to just inflation, because in 1960, a new Cessna 172 was about $9,500. Run that through an inflation calculator, and you land somewhere around $100,000 in today's money. A new Skyhawk is not $100,000, sits somewhere around the mid-400s to $500,000 depending on avionics and options. The airplane did not just keep up with inflation. It went to 4 or 5 times its inflation-adjusted price. In comparison, the average new car in the 60s was roughly $2,600. Adjust that to today, and you get something in the high 20s, call it $27,000 or $28,000. The real average new car today is around $50,000, so cars roughly doubled relative to their inflation baseline. The 172 roughly quadrupled. Then look at what people earn. Back then, a typical family was bringing in about $5,600 a year. Inflation adjusted that is around the high 50s or $60,000. Today, the median household is in the low 80s. So incomes have moved up a bit faster than inflation, cars moved a bit faster than that, but light airplanes just sprinted off into another weight class entirely. In 1960, a new 172 was maybe 1.5 to 2 years of a normal family income. Today, that same basic 4-seat trainer and tourer is 5 to 6 years of the median household's income. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.